Hi guys, today I want to talk about writing and publishing an academic journal article. I'm going to be going through the various stages of how that works, from generating an initial idea, developing that idea into something that's worth publishing, writing it up, choosing a venue for publication, getting it published there, and also what to do if you can't get that idea published in any of the places you want it to be. So I'm going to be going through this pretty much from my perspective, the kind of issues that I find coming up and how I think through those issues at each stage. And I'm hoping that that's going to be useful for you guys too. Okay, so let's get going with that right now, starting with where do ideas come from in the first place? Okay, so this is a really difficult topic to talk about because I guess it's different for everybody. But in my case, I reckon there's basically two sources of new ideas coming. And that is the big projects that I'm working on. That's kind of one source. And then there is the kind of, additional extra stuff that I will do to give me additional papers that I'm going to write up for publication. Okay, so let me explain that. Pretty much at all stages of your academic career, whether you're a master's student, PhD student, early career academic, or a senior academic, you are going to have the main project, or maybe 2 or 3 main projects that you are working on, okay? That might be your PhD dissertation. So there, you might already have an idea of where you want that to take you, right? So what the topic is, what your main ideas are on that topic, what your conclusions are going to be. But there's going to be gaps there. So you've got your starting points, you've got your ideal endpoint, your conclusion, and you might need some ideas or theories or whatever along the way to take you from A to B to your eventual C. So you might be thinking, okay, I need to fill in that gap in the middle, and that is the paper that you are going to write next. Before we go any further, I just want to jump in here and say, if you're enjoying this content and you want to help me out by supporting the channel, go and take a look at my Ko-Fi page, see what we've got there, and see ways in which you can help me out. So let me give you an example of that from my own case. A couple of years back, I was writing a book on truth. It's called What Truth Is. I was trying to address lots of different aspects of truth. So not just how truths get to be true, but also what kinds of thing are true, okay? Are they sentences, beliefs, propositions, or whatever? And it turned out that my theory kind of required me to take propositions to be the things that are true or false. So I wanted to develop a theory of propositions, and kind of looking at the terrain, looking at the way that my theory of truth was going, it kind of meant I had to develop a theory of propositions that looked a certain way. Given that I had to develop and defend this theory, I needed to look at, well, what are the arguments for that kind of theory? What are the arguments against that kind of theory? So that paper, that piece of research was all involved in, arguing for this view of propositions and trying to defend it against the objections. And really, a lot of the ideas from that paper were driven by this bigger project, having to fit this idea of propositions into that whole bigger project on truth. So that's one source of new ideas. But that's not the only way you're going to get new ideas for writing papers. You are going to have a lot of random encounters with ideas throughout your career as an academic. And, a lot of those will generate new ideas that you want to write up for publication, right? So it might be that you are reading something that's recently been published, an author has put forward an idea and you think, well, I think there's something wrong with that. I can respond to that. Or you might see a talk at a conference and you think, something's going funny there, I can write something about that. Or maybe just, in passing, some academic says, oh, nobody believes in that kind of theory because, that kind of theory just can't work. And you think to yourself, hang on, I think I can make that kind of theory work. So reading, talks, encounters with other academics, this kind of thing, these are all ways of generating new ideas that might be worth writing up for publication, that aren't really related to your core piece of research, your PhD thesis or the book you're writing or whatever, but nevertheless, they might well be worth spending time on. You always have to make a strategic decision with these. So again, let me give you an example of this from my own case. I have written quite a bit on truth maker maximalism. That's the idea that every truth has a truth maker. I've got some quite kind of long and detailed arguments in favor of that view. And one day I happened to be at a conference with the philosopher Philip Goff. He's a philosopher of mind, a panpsychist, and he's interested in this stuff. And he was asking me, okay, what's the quick argument for truth-maker maximalism? We were like walking to the train, we had about 2 minutes left, and he was like, give me the 30-second version. And I didn't really know what to say. I kind of thought, well, all the arguments I've got are pretty kind of long and involved. Maybe there isn't a short argument. So I wish I had one, but at the moment I don't. And that idea just sat there with me. And then a couple of years later, kind of completely unrelatedly, I was teaching the master's students epistemology. We were reading Tim Williamson's book on knowledge and its limits. And he's got this argument in there that has a certain structure. And I was thinking through the argument and thinking, oh, hang on, if this argument works, I could repurpose that argument based on its structure to apply as an argument for truth-maker maximalism. And it turns out you can write up this argument in a very kind of short and concise way. So this kind of idea, just putting these two kind of random, seemingly unconnected things together, led to this paper I wrote, A Short Argument for Truth-maker Maximalism. And, the idea was, here's a nice short argument for this view. Maybe it's not the best argument, but, at least it answers Philip's question, what is the quick version of the argument for that view? So that was basically a bunch of random chance encounters with people and ideas that put together in the right way gave me an idea for a paper. Okay, so you've got your main core bits of research, but you've also got these kind of additional random encounters that might also be ideas for a research paper. With the latter, you have to kind of make a strategic decision. If you are doing an important core long-term project like writing a book or a PhD, you've got to think, do these extra things kind of contribute to your overall academic project, or are they going to hinder it, right? If you've got to get a PhD done, maybe you shouldn't be mucking around with all these extra ideas. On the other hand, if you're trying to fill your CV up with lots of different papers demonstrating that you can work across a range of areas, then maybe it is good to do more of these kind of random different papers in different areas. It kind of all depends. The point is, you should think through when you get an idea, is it actually going to be worth me spending the time developing the idea, writing it up, trying to get it published? It isn't an involved process. It takes a long, long time to go from idea to publication. Is that actually going to serve you? Okay, so you've got an idea, you think it's a good idea. How do you develop it into something that is worth publishing? This isn't rocket science. This is the kind of stuff that you learn throughout your academic career. You're going to talk to your peers, your colleagues, your PhD cohort, or whatever. You get feedback, you try and work out whether it's a good idea or not. What are the problems? What are the ways to, think through those? You're going to start shaping it into something that you can present. If you've got the option, go and present it at a work in progress talk, right? You don't have to have everything worked out. You can just lay it out for your PhD cohort, your colleagues or whatever, and say, look, I've got some ideas. I think this is how it's going to go. Kind of help me think through these ideas. Work in progress talks are really, really good from this. From that point onwards, you are developing it into something a bit more polished that maybe you take to a workshop talk, a conference talk, that kind of thing. Okay, there you're really kind of looking for two main bits of feedback. Does it make sense? Okay, so you're looking for feedback on the way you have expressed the ideas. And you're also looking for feedback on, are the ideas any good? So what are the main objections? How might you get around those objections? So you've always got to be looking for those two bits of feedback. Okay, once you've done that and you've considered that feedback and you think you've got a good way of expressing your idea and you've considered some of the main problems and you've kind of worked your way through that and thought, yeah, I've got good answers to that, it's time to start writing this up for publication. As you start doing that, you've got some presentational issues to consider, okay? So how are you going to frame this paper? What is going to be the in? How are you going to start the paper off in a way that draws in readers and reviewers, in a way that says, yes, I've got something important to say that I can say in the next 6,000 words. This is going to be important, it's going to be interesting, and I'm going to have something new to say on the issue. If you can't frame the idea that you've got in those kind of terms, maybe it's not an idea that's worth publishing as a thing standing on its own. You've also got to consider the length of the paper, right? Is this a really great big idea? It's a new idea, it's innovative, it deserves lots of detail, so it's going to be a really big, 8,000 word paper. Or is it a little point that you're pointing out that this other philosopher has an idea, but there's kind of a problem with her argument? Maybe that's a really short 3,000 word paper. You've got to consider these points in advance, right? Because if what you're doing is kind of conceptually quite small, but you write this great big long paper defending it, no one's going to want to publish that, right? If the idea deserves a small paper, you've got to write a small paper. Once you've made those decisions and you get down to the writing, one thing to consider is, where should you include lots of detail and where should you kind of brush over things or just try and give a broad outline? You don't want detail everywhere, because if you put in loads and loads of detail right the way through, you're going to get a paper that is quite tedious and will almost certainly be too long. So for instance, the introduction, you've got to get the big idea across quickly. If someone's read 2 pages and they haven't really got clear on what it is you're trying to do, that paper is not going to be of interest to readers and it's not going to get published. So your introduction, you might want to include like the broad brushstrokes with detail to come later on. It's important that you include detail at the right places of the paper. And where you can be brief, you should be, because you want this paper to be accessible, to be readable, and to be as concise as it can be. Okay, so when you've got a written version that you think meets those criteria, then you want to pass it on to friends, to readers, supervisors if you've got them, experienced colleagues who've published plenty of stuff, who've been through all this and know what they're talking about, to get some feedback. Now look, it's not always easy to do this because, academics are busy. So you might do this on a tit-for-tat basis with peers, with colleagues or whatever. You read their papers, they read yours. You give each other comments. If you're a PhD student with a supervisor, or if you've got like a kind of a staff mentor or whatever, you can ask them to read a paper if it's really important to you that this paper gets published. Don't send something for someone to read if it's not your best version. If somebody sends something to me and it's very drafty and it's very clear that they haven't really kind of worked through it, I'm kind of thinking, I don't want to put lots of time into this yet. I want you to go away and get your best version before you send it to me for comments. So if you try your paper out on a bunch of different readers, you're going to get a bunch of comments back. Now, how do you deal with those comments? You might have a whole range of different comments. I suggest you think through all of them, but you don't want to change the shape of the paper in response to all of them, because then you can end up with quite a misshapen paper, right? If you try to respond to every point that everybody has made, the paper might not make as much cohesive sense as when it has this kind of clear identity of here's what it is I'm trying to do. So you've got to make this decision. Is this comment that you've been given a good clarification that you could just make a little tweak? Should you take the paper in a different direction based on this comment if it's a really important thing? Or is it something that you should just kind of ignore? Full stop. Making good decisions in those kind of cases does take a bit of experience, but what I would say is, it's important that you're responsive to people's comments, but you don't want your paper to end up kind of all over the place because you're trying to preempt or address every possible objection that any possible person might have. Okay, so now you've got a paper that's ready for publication, that's ready for you to submit to a journal. Where are you going to submit it? So you're going to make a list of your, say, top 5 journals that you would like to submit to. In doing that, there's a whole bunch of factors that you want to consider. I'm going to go through that in detail in this video over here. Thanks to all my Ko-Fi supporters for making this content possible. Thanks to you for watching this far. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you back here on Attic Philosophy soon.